Please welcome to the stage, put your hands together now, Robert Alston.
Thank you so much. What a crowd, man, wow. I tell you what, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Don. It sure beats the one I got a few nights ago. I tell you, a fella says, our speaker this evening is Robert Alston. Then he said, y'all quit your moaning and groaning. He said, you go down to the Mexican restaurant on 2-for-1 tequila night with $12 and see what you come back with. So I appreciate that a lot. You may not be able to tell it, but I'm shaking like a dog trying to pass a peach seed up here. And so I appreciate anything you can do for me.
Love you, Robert.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I tell you what, I almost didn't make it here tonight. A week ago today, I had what could have been a very, very serious horseback riding accident. I was mounting my horse, Big Chief. I put my left foot in the stirrup, put my left hand up on the saddle horn. And just as I was pulling my weight up into the saddle, my left hand slid off the saddle horn. I fell back onto the ground. My left foot still hung in the stirrup, and Big Chief took off at a gallop. And I don't mind telling you, I was fearing for my life. I don't believe I'd be standing here in front of you tonight if the manager of Walmart hadn't come out and unplugged it. How many of you familiar with that little series of publications called Life's Little Instruction Books? Came out several years ago, little rectangular pieces, you know. H. Jackson Brown was the author. As a matter of fact, they were so popular, he came out with Roman numeral 2 and Roman numeral 3 and so forth. And what it was just a collection of suggestions and quotations and stuff that his family had collected through the years. And it inspired me to come up with my own, which I've titled Thoughts from the Prone Position. And it's just some admonitions and things I call life's mysteries, a number of different things like that. And I thought I'd just share a few of them with you just to see what you think about them. For example, if you're offered a breath mint, take it. There's usually a reason for that. And let me ask you something else. Why use a laxative that says it works while you sleep? I don't know about you, but that holds no appeal for me. That's bad stuff there. And then, of course, how many fig leaves do you think Eve had to try on before she found one she liked? That's a question us guys have to ask all the time. Now, you know you have a problem if you need a shopping cart in a liquor store. I see some folks nodding over here. Okay. My dad told me this a long time ago. He said, if your eyes pooch out on stems, there's a good chance your underwear is too tight. And then, of course, having a smoking section in a restaurant makes about as much sense as having a wee-wee section in a swimming pool. I see some of you agree with me on that. All right, that's good. Now, as Don mentioned, my wife and I live in a small town, Hamilton, Georgia, population 400 on a real busy day. Hamilton is a step back in time. It's rural, it's country, but it's got the greatest people on the earth that live in the Hamilton area. Amen there. I tell you what, though, we're 5 miles south of Callaway Gardens on Highway 27, about 20 miles north of Columbus. We do have 2 traffic lights for no apparent reason. I tell you, usually it's so quiet in Hamilton that you can hear boll weevil TT on cotton. It's something. It's amazing. Wild stuff there. Now, because Hamilton is as small as so many small southern towns do, it has a little town square. A little different than most in the South because it only has commercial buildings on 3 sides. And as a result of that, some of the merchants have to share the same office space there, you know. And for example, the veterinarian and the taxidermist share the same building there in Hamilton. That's right. And the signage out front in big bold letters, it says veterinary hospital and taxidermy shop. And then in smaller letters underneath it says, either way, you get your pet back. That's Hamilton. Now, just like most small towns, how many of you from a small town, maybe when you were younger or something? I'm sure a lot of us were. But like most small towns, there's some real characters in Hamilton. For example, there's a lady that's kind of getting up in age, Mavis Pirtle. And Mavis walked into the only appliance store in Hamilton about a year ago. And she walked in, and Mavis had a little bit of snuff kind of tucked down here in the lower lip, you know. And she walked in, and the salesman came kind of striding up to her, you know, and he said, "Yes, ma'am, can I help you?" She said, "Yes, I'd like to get me an air conditioner." He said, "Well, ma'am, you've come to the right place. We've got all makes and all sizes." He said, "What size BTU would you like?" She said, "Well, I don't know nothing about no BTU." He said, "Well, ma'am, I can't make a proper recommendation on the size air conditioner you need unless I know what size BTU you need." She said, "Well, all I know is I need one that'll cool a BUT as big as a TUB." Back this past fall, we were having a one-man art show on the square there in Hamilton. Local fellow named Michelangelo McCord. And Michelangelo's one of these modern artists, you know. You look at it, you're not sure what it is, and the artist has to tell you. And he had several of his paintings out there on the square, and a fellow came up in, he was looking at one of them, you know, and he said, "Excuse me," he said, "What is this?" He said, "Well, he said, that's a cow grazing." He said, "Well, where's the grass?" He said, "Well, he's already eaten the grass." He said, "Well, where's the cow?" He said, "You don't reckon the cow would stay around after he'd eaten all the grass, do you?" I was at the post office there, which is on one side of the square, not long ago, and I saw a fellow I hadn't seen in a while. His name's old Bronco Fargo. And Bronco is an extremely bow-legged cowboy, okay? I mean, real bow-legged. I hadn't seen him in a while. I said, "Bronco, what you been doing, bud?" I said, "Where you been? I hadn't seen you in a long time." He said, "Well," he said, "I tell you what, I got so dead-gum tired of handling them cattle. That stuff's hard work." He said, "I thought I'd get me one of them city-fied jobs, and I went up to Atlanta and got me a job in a department store." He said, "What I'd do is when these folks would come up to the escalator on the second floor, I'd ask them what they needed, and I'd kind of help them find the right place on the floor for them." I said, "Well, that's interesting. Now, what brought you back?" He said, "Well," he said, "I tell you what, I was up there the other day, and a large woman with tight polyester slacks stepped off the escalator. And he said, 'Ma'am, can I help you?' And she said, 'Yes.' She said, 'I'd like some talcum powder.' He said, 'Well, ma'am, walk this way.' And he turned and for her to follow him. She said, 'Look, cowboy, if I could walk that way, I wouldn't need the talcum powder.'" Now, we got a couple of brothers in that Hamilton area there that are renowned fellows of kind of ill repute, and that's Cooter and Cloyd. And Cooter and Cloyd, after work one day, were driving down Highway 116, and they was drinking some of them tall Budweiser bottles, you know, had them some beer in the bottle. And they came around a curve, and old Cloyd, who's sitting over there on the shotgun side, you know, he looks up ahead, and he says, "Oh, gosh, Cooter, we in big trouble." He said, "The sheriff's got a roadblock up there." He said, "They're going to get us for sure." Cooter said, "Don't worry about a thing, Cloyd." And Cooter pulled over the side of the road. He said, "We're going to finish these cool beers here. And then we're going to take these labels and peel them off the bottle, and we're going to stick that label right up here on our far. Then we're going to put them bottles under the seat, and then we're going up out of that roadblock." So they did that. They put that label right there, you know, when they finished the bottle, got up there, and old sheriff, he leaned right in the car there, got the window down, you know, he said, "You boys been drinking?" And old Cooter said, "No, sir." And he pointed up there to that label. He said, "Me and Cloyd's on the patch." In Hamilton, we have what we call the HIBC. I think that was alluded to in the opening comments there in the introduction. It's called the Hamilton International Breakfast Club. And it's international because some of our members have been to Alabama. Now, I found out that the men from the Hamilton area meet up there for coffee in the morning. And sometimes it's 5 and sometimes it's 20 or so. And they're all walks of life. I mean, we got doctors and surveyors and farmers and mechanics and you name it. There's somebody, everybody there. And through the years, there's been some wonderful, what I call pearls of wisdom, some profound things that have come out of this group. And some of it's kind of staggering mentally, quite frankly. And I thought, since I've documented these things so carefully, I would share a few of them with you here tonight just to see if you enjoy them as much as I do. For example, we have a retired Georgia Power executive, and he came out with this, Jim. He said, if it weren't for Thomas Edison, we'd all be watching TV by candlelight. One of the local school principals says he wasn't buying his kids a thesaurus. He wanted them to walk to school like he did. And then, of course, our illustrious sheriff, he said, never buy jewelry from someone who's out of breath. The only doctor in town. You might want to write this one down. This is a health admonition here. Get your pen, pencil out. Never fry bacon in the nude. That's a good thing. That's just a good thing to consider there. And then our barber says, if your left ear is warmer than your right ear, then your toupee is probably on crooked. These are intelligent folks, aren't they? Well, a mortician said if you don't go to other people's funerals, they won't go to yours. And then we even have a pilot that flies jets all over the world. He said, the problem with most countries is they run by foreigners. And then our mayor, ex-mayor, he said if your parents didn't have any children, there's a real good chance you won't either. Profound thought. I hope that you're ever in the Hamilton area in the mornings on Monday through Friday, you'll stop in and add to this list. But our youngest member of the HIBC about a year ago came in and he said, fellas, I got a problem. So what is it? He said, my pretty little old wife, Molly. I said, yeah, we know Molly. He said, we've been married about a year now. He said, but just like so many young couples, we found that credit is easy to get and hard to pay off. And he said, I was wondering if a couple of you fellows who are well schooled in the financial sector could help us set up a budget so that we could get out of debt. So a couple of my fellows volunteered, and sure enough, man, about every 6 weeks he'd come in and give us a report, tell us how good everything was going. And about 3 months ago, right there before football season was over, he came in on a Monday morning and he was kind of perplexed, and he says, I got a problem. So what is it? He said, well, my pretty little old wife, Molly. I said, yeah, we know Molly. He said, well, Saturday, he said, I'm watching TV, and that afternoon, Molly comes in the house, and lo and behold, Molly was wearing a brand new red miniskirt. And he said, I knew it was new because I'd never seen it on her before. And he said, so I told her, I said, now, Molly, I know that's not on our budget. She said, I know it. I feel bad about it. She said, but I saw it down there on the mannequin at Dillard's, and it looked good, and I knew it looked real good on me. He said, well, honey, I hope you'll also recall that we made a pledge to one another that when we were tempted to buy something, when the other mate was not there, that we would holler out loud, get thee behind me, Satan. She said, I did that, and he said, it looks great from back here, too. I'm sure many of you are from the South, just like me. For those of you who aren't, we're glad you're here. We love you anyway. We hope that you learn to love the South as much as we do. Not long ago, I was being introduced to a group, and the MC says, I want to welcome to the podium Robert Alston. He said, he's so Southern, he's related to himself. And I take that as a sincere form of flattery. I really do. You know, I don't think it's any secret that people outside the South kind of poke fun at us, you know, and it's, you know, kind of ridicule us a little bit here and there. And I guess some of it has to do with our accent and our slow pattern of speech and so forth. For example, I was on a return flight from Tucson back to Atlanta a few months ago. And I happened to be sitting next to a really talkative fellow. And during the course of the conversation, it became obvious that he was a native Californian. So I'm trying to be a nice fellow, you know, and so I pursued the conversation. I said, well, you know, I spent a good deal of time in your state this past summer. He said, is that right, Robert? I said, what cities did you visit while you were there? I said, well, I spent most of my time in San Jose and La Jolla. And he said, look, Robert, I know you folks from Georgia are a little slow. Do you mind if I correct you? Not at all. You go right ahead. He said, well, in California, the J is pronounced as an H. It's San Jose. It's La Jolla. I got you. I understand now. He said, by the way, how long were you out there? I said, all of Hoon and most of July. This past summer, there was a national governors conference in Atlanta. All 50 governors of the states of the Union were there. And a fellow who happened to own a travel agency that was situated directly on the Chattahoochee River put a very simple ad in the travel section of the Atlanta Journal that Sunday. And the ad read, week-long cruise, $99. Well, on Monday morning, he goes in, he opens the front door, gets the lights on, gets behind the counter, and no sooner does he do that than in the front door comes the governor of Pennsylvania. And the governor of Pennsylvania said, excuse me, do you have any more of those week-long cruises for $99? He said, how many do you need? He said, one. He said, that's wonderful. So the governor hands him $99. He hands the governor a ticket and a brochure on the cruise. And as the governor's reading this thing, he comes up behind the governor and hits him right in the back of the head with a big stick, knocks him horizontal as a railroad tie, throws him in an inner tube, and out the back door directly into the Chattahoochee River he goes. Now, he had no sooner gotten that back door closed than in the front door comes the governor of New Jersey. And he had run all the way from his hotel. His shirt's halfway unbuttoned. He's sweating profusely. Excuse me, you got any more than week-long cruises for $99? How many do you need? One. You're in luck, buddy. He gives him $99. He hands the governor a brochure and a ticket for the cruise, and he repeats the same scenario. Hits him with a big stick, knocks him horizontal as a railroad tie, cold as ice, throws him in an inner tube, and out the back door directly into the Chattahoochee River he goes. Now, grasp this mental picture with me, if you will. Here are these two distinguished governors of great northern states, floating flat on their backs on inner tubes, gazing skyward, headed south down the Chattahoochee River to the Gulf of Mexico. And the governor of Pennsylvania looks over at the governor of New Jersey. He said, do you think they're going to serve any meals on this cruise? And the governor of New Jersey says, I don't know. They didn't last year. You know, this last presidential election, it doesn't matter who you're for, but there was Senator Kerry and Senator Edwards were doing some last-minute campaigning down in South Georgia. And they were in one of these specially equipped buses, you know, and they got the Secret Service with them and all these folks. And they're riding from Valdosta through that wonderful farmland in South Georgia, headed toward Moultrie. And Senator Edwards looks out the front of the bus and he sees it's a produce stand on the side of the road up ahead, so he instructs the driver to pull over and stop. So the driver does that, and you know, Senator Edwards gets off, and Senator Kerry, out of curiosity, gets off behind him. And Senator Edwards walks up to the produce stand and he said, "I'll take some taters, maters, and onions, please." And the farmer standing there behind the produce stand said, "You must be from North Carolina." He said, "That's right." And he got his produce and he gave the farmer's money, gets back on the bus. Well, Senator Kerry is totally perplexed by the whole thing. He said, well, Senator Edwards said, "How in the world did that fellow know you're from North Carolina?" He said, "Well, Senator Kerry, I think it's just the way I talk, my accent." He said, Isn't that something? So they go on up about 10 miles ahead and they come to a big intersection. There's a few stores there. And Senator Kerry, who's our presidential candidate at that time for the Democratic Party, says, "Pull over up here, driver." So the driver pulls over. Senator Kerry exits. I mean, everybody exits in. Secret Services all around, and they got a Herald and the Columbus Ledger and the New York Times and the Washington Post, everybody, USA Today, they all out there covering this thing, And he strides up these steps into this store, and Senator Kerry walks up to the fellow there behind the counter. He said, "I'd like some taters, maters, and onions, please." And the manager of the place said, "Well, you must be from Massachusetts." He said, "That's right." He said, "How in the world did you know?" He said, "Because this here's a hardware store." You know the difference between a northern zoo and a southern zoo? A southern zoo has a description of each animal on its cage, along with a recipe. A little different here. One of my favorites is a fellow, you've probably heard of him, renowned portrait artist named Farley Smoot. And Farley lives up in the mountains of North Georgia, way back in there, okay? A little old bitty cabin up in the woods. And this lady pulls up to his cabin some time back. She's in a long stretch chauffeur-driven limo. She gets out, buddy, I mean, she is looking good. She got some expensive clothes on. She got jewelry hanging all over. Walks up the steps to Farley's home, knocks on that screen door. Farley comes to the door, says, "Yes, ma'am, can I help you?" And she said, I understand that you're the most acclaimed portrait artist in all of America. She said, "I've come to ask you to come to Chicago and paint my portrait." He said, "Well, ma'am," he said, "I ain't much for the big city, to tell you the truth." She said, "Well, I am prepared to pay you the sum of $50,000 to come to Chicago and paint my portrait." She said, "However, there is one caveat to that." Said, "I want you to paint me in the nude." And Farley said, "Well, I don't know." Said, "My wife Pearl's out picking mushrooms right now, and I'm going to have to check with her about that. So you come back tomorrow, and we'll find out about that." So the next morning, bright and early, she shows up in the limo again, and she said, "Well, Mr. Smoot," said, what's going to be your reply to that?" She said, "Well," he said, "Pearl decided it'd be all right for me to paint you in the nude, but he says, there is one stipulation." He said, "I at least have to keep my socks on because I got to have somewhere to wipe my brushes." How many of us have children? Just a show of hands here. Let me see. All right. I tell you what, I don't know about you, I was a large baby at birth. As a matter of fact, I was a cesarean birth. You can't really tell it anymore, except that when I leave home, I go out through a window. I think most of us guys thought, child rearing would be easy. Just be simple. You keep one end full and the other end dry, and it's a real simple thing. But, I can remember, like many of you fathers can, when the kids were really infants, you could hold them in the crook of your arm and their little head in the palm of your hand. And those were really tender moments, unquestionably. Real special times for us. But I tell you what, I'm convinced to this day that the greatest innovation, the greatest invention known to mankind is a disposable diaper. Look at some people amening, there's some heads nodding, I'm telling you what. And I tell you why I say that. I was a gagger. Okay. Now, I could handle a wet one with the best of them. But you throw a little fiber in that bad boy, and the gag reflex took over uncontrollably, okay? And I would just simply holler for my wife, Berta. And she'll tell you that to this day. It's true. I know one thing. Changing dirty diapers will cure you of biting your fingernails. I'll do that. Okay. I sure will. I'll do that. You know the word diaper spelled backwards is repaid? It is. Things come full circle, don't they? Well, I'll tell you what. When our son Travis was about a year old, being the dutiful husband I am, I went to my wife and I said, honey, tomorrow's Saturday. You've been cooped up here with Travis all this time. I think it'd be a great idea if you just got out tomorrow and had yourself a good time with some of your friends. So she took me up on that. She made several phone calls. And the next morning, Saturday morning, she said, now, Robert, I got a brand new Pampers on Travis here. I want you to make sure he's well taken care of while I'm gone. I said, honey, don't you worry about a thing. It's college football season. Travis and I are going to do us some bonding. It's going to be a great day. You go off and have some fun. Well, she did. She got with her buddies, and they met at IHOP for breakfast. And then they went shopping. And then they had one of their power lunches, you know. And then they went power shopping. And by the time she came home that evening, she was carrying a double arm load of packages, you know. She got serious about this day off. And by the time she hit the front door, I have to confess, our son was carrying what I would have to describe as a maximum load in his Pampers. And when she saw that, she really cut loose on me. She said, Dadgummit, Robert, I can't believe you let Travis go around in this condition all day. I said, well, honey, it says right here on the box, good for up to 20 pounds. But you know, kids are funny, aren't they? I tell you what, there was a grandpa. He's sitting on his front porch one day. He's in his rocking chair, and he's surveying this scene that's taking place on his lawn out there before him. And it's his family's having a reunion. His wife's out there, and his kids and their spouses and his grandkids, and there's laughter and there's games and there's a picnic. It's just very warming to him, you know, to see this scene unfold. And about that time, one of his grandsons comes running up to him on the porch. Grandpa, what is it, sonny boy? What is it? He said, Grandpa, can you make a sound like a frog? Well, sure I can, sonny boy. I said, why do you ask? He said, 'cause Grandma says when you croak, she's taking the whole family to Hawaii. Now, kids are not only funny, they're unpredictable, very unpredictable. Little boy sitting on the curb, okay? He's got him a mason jar filled with clear liquid. He's got the lid screwed on as tight as you can get it. He's sitting on the curb, and he's just vigorously shaking this bottle of liquid. He's oblivious to everything around him. About that time, a priest walks down the sidewalk behind this boy, and he stops, and he looks over the little boy's shoulder, and he said, Son, so what do you have there in that jar that you're shaking so hard? Well, the little boy doesn't stop. He just looks back over his shoulder. You know, he said, oh, Father, this here is the most powerful liquid in the world. This here is turpentine. And the priest said, oh, my son, said, I'm afraid you're sadly mistaken. The most powerful liquid in the world, my son, is holy water. He said, as a matter of fact, as an ordained priest, I can take a couple of drops of holy water and I can sprinkle it on a pregnant woman's abdomen, and she'll pass a baby boy every time. Well, this little boy evidently is unimpressed. He's still shaking. He looks back over his shoulder. He said, let me tell you something, Father. I can take a couple of drops of this here turpentine and I can sprinkle it on a cat's butt, and he'll pass a motorcycle. That's impressive stuff. I know many of us in here are married. Some of us aren't, but are about to be, I bet. My wife and I have been married 35 years. And somebody asked me not long ago, said, Robert, how have you maintained a marriage for 35 years like that? And I said, well, it's very simple. Right after we got married, we came to an agreement. And that would be that I would make all the major decisions and my wife would make all the minor decisions. And do you know that in 35 years of marriage, we hadn't needed to make any major decisions? But really, my wife and I, we have a wonderful relationship. As a matter of fact, this morning I said, honey, how about a hot breakfast? And she said, why don't you just set fire to your cornflakes? It's a special arrangement we have here. Of course, I should have known her tendencies when, before we got married, she continually referred to the rehearsal dinner as the Last Supper. Seriously, though, one thing each of us can do to enhance our relationships with others is to learn to say, I'm sorry, and learn to say, I love you. And my lovely wife has mastered that. She says, I'm sorry, I love you. You know, if we live long enough, we're going to face those inevitable consequences of aging. There's just no getting around it. And, you know, sometimes that bad memory loss and Alzheimer's, it comes with that. My mother had that the last 2 years of her life. It's a very debilitating thing. So many of us have been touched by that in our life. But I can assure you of this, as far as I'm concerned, you better find the humor in it or it'll break you down. I have an elderly friend in the Hamilton area who's had some problem with that memory area. And his doctor calls him once a year to get a physical. And so a few months back, it came time for his physical. So I drove him down to Columbus, where his doctor is. And to the doctor's credit, he gave him a very, very thorough exam. And as he's winding down the exam, he looks in his nose, and he looks in his eyes, and he looks in his throat, and he looked in his left ear, and then he looked in his right ear, and he says, oh, my goodness. And the fellow's name's Furtis. Furtis said, what is it, Doc? He said, well, Furtis, there's something lodged in your ear. Well, can you get it out, Doc? He said, I'm going to do my best. So he went to probing and pulling and tugging, and sure enough, out it came, and the doc says, my goodness, I don't believe it. Furtis said, what is it, Doc? He said, well, it's a suppository. He said, a suppository? That explains it. Now I know where my hearing aid is. Now, I'm going to preface this next story and tell you that it's a clean joke before I start, okay? There's an elderly couple on the front porch of the nursing home. They're sitting there in rockers side by side. Now, they're not married to one another. Each of their respective spouses had gone on to be with the Lord some years before. But they're sitting there quietly rocking, just adjacent to each other. And finally, the guy leans over to the lady and said, Hilda, I bet you can't guess my age. Oh, yes, I can, Herman. No, you can't. Yes, I can. No, you can't. Said, all right, so how old am I then? She said, Herman, stand up. Well, Herman rose slowly out of that rocker, you know, and he kind of got his balance up. He said, all right, Hilda. Said, how old am I? She said, Herman, drop your trousers. He said, what? Said, drop your trousers. So Herman drops his trousers, instead his skivvies on, you know. He's looking all right. He's just standing up there on the front porch of the nursing home with his pants around his ankle. But he said, all right. Said, Hilda, said, how old am I? She said, Herman, give me a little 360 pirouette up here on the porch. So Herman does, you know, 27 seconds later, he does a full circle. He said, all right, Hilda, said, how old am I? She said, Herman, you're 94. He said, how in the world you know that? She said, because you told me this morning. You know, with all this uproar about telemarketers and all, you know, much as we don't like for them to call, at least if they call, we can hang up on them, you know, and say, you know, goodbye, that kind of thing. The thing I'm more concerned about is the people that come to your door unsolicited, you know. This past Halloween was interesting. You may have had the same thing. Had a little guy come up and ring the doorbell, you know, and he was dressed exactly like an IRS agent. Very authentic deal, you know, had his little badge on and everything. He even took 40% of my candy. I mean, it was all the way across the board. It was authentic. Bubba was selling vacuums down in South Georgia. And he went out in the country and he knocked on this little frame house, you know. And lady comes to the door and he said, ma'am, I got something you really need to look at. So she let him in, you know, and he's got his machine out there and he's extolling the virtues of this wonderful vacuum. He said, I tell you what, all of a sudden he reached in his bag and gets a double handful of cow manure and throws it out there on the carpet and spreads it all over the place, you know. She says, what in the world are you doing with that? He said, well, ma'am, he said, if this machine won't vacuum that up and get this place clean as a whistle, he said, I'll eat it and chase it with a glass of buttermilk. Well, she got up headed for the kitchen. Said, excuse me, ma'am, you hadn't seen my demonstration yet. She said, I don't need to. I'm going to get some buttermilk because this house ain't wired for electricity. You know, I don't know why it is that sometimes mother-in-laws get a bad rap. It's really not. I had a wonderful mother-in-law. She's no longer with us. Well, man's walking on the beach at Jekyll Island early in the morning. It's a very pensive time. Nobody else is on the beach. The waves are lapping gently at the beach. The seagulls are darting and weaving overhead, and the sun's just beginning to peak above the horizon. And as he walks down the beach, he stumbles over an object in the sand. And he reaches down, he picks it up, and he discovers that it's an ancient vase. And as he knocks the encrusted sand off of it, he pulls the lid off, and lo and behold, out pops a genie. And the genie says, oh, kind sir, you've rescued me from some 2,600 years of captivity by an evil spirit in this vase. For that I shall grant you any 3 wishes your heart desires. There is, however, one caveat, and that is that whatever you get, your mother-in-law gets double. So what would be your first wish? He thought for a minute. He said, well, I don't want to appear real greedy, but if I had about $5 million in the bank, I think that'd kind of ease me through life. Done deal. You can write checks on it immediately. Understand, of course, that your mother-in-law now has $10 million in her bank account. So what's your second request? He said, well, I love the outdoors. And I think it'd be wonderful. I have 10,000 acres of the most beautiful ranch and timberland in the great state of Montana. Done deal. Deeds in the mail. Your mother-in-law now has 20,000 acres adjacent to yours. So what's your third and final request? He thought for a minute. He said, why don't you just beat me half to death? But you know, we were talking a while ago about when we get older, we start struggling with our faculties a little bit. And a 91-year-old man goes to his doctor for his physical. About a week later, the doctor goes to this charity ball. He sees this 91-year-old man out there. Man, he's out there on the dance floor. He's got him a 28-year-old good-looking gal, and they're dancing. They're having a good time, you know. And the old man comes running up to the doc. He says, thanks, doc. He said, well, what for? He said, well, he said, you know, you said find a red-hot mama and be cheerful. He said, that's not what I said. He said, I told you had a heart murmur, be careful. But sometimes we kind of, as we get older, I've seen it every now and then, where we can kind of turn on our spouses as we get older. You know, we can do things that we're not real proud of. This fellow's dying. He's on his deathbed in his home. And all of a sudden, he can smell through the house that his wife's baking these wonderful cookies downstairs. And he's thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if I just had one last chocolate chip cookie before I died? So he rolls out of bed, and he kind of crawls over to the landing on the second floor, and then he kind of eases all the way down the stairs, and with his last waning ounces of strength, he pulls himself up on the kitchen table, reaches up to get one of those soft, moist, freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. And just as he does, his wife reaches over there with a spatula and goes, whop, like that. He said, what in the world was that for? She said, they're for the funeral. But, you know, even in old age, we can show a lot of intelligence sometimes. There's an old farmer, had him a spread over here in central Georgia, you know, and it was kind of a unique place because he had a freshwater spring there, and he had kind of made a big, many people would call it a pond, but it was almost a pool, you know, it was a lake, if you will, but it was clear and it was cool and it was fresh all during the year, especially in the summertime. It felt wonderful. but it was some ways from his house. So one day he hadn't been down there in about a week, and he decided he'd walk down and kind of check on the pond there, with the stream and all, fresh spring. And so he walks down there, and as he approaches it, he could hear laughter and giggling and so forth. And as he got a little closer, he could tell that there were a bunch of college girls skinny dipping, okay? And so as he approached the pond, these girls got out there in the deeper water and kind of pulled up, got up there together. And the girl said, "Mister," he said, "we're not coming out till you leave." He said, "Look, girls," he said, "I didn't come down here to see you without your clothes on or try to make you jump out of the pond." He said, "All I did was come down here to feed the alligators, okay?" Well, sooner or later, we all have to go face our Maker. Lady had a cardiac arrest and died. She goes up to the pearly gates where St. Peter's standing as the lone sentinel to the gates of heaven. And St. Peter's interviewing folks there in line. Finally the line winds down to her, and St. Peter said, "Yes, ma'am." Said, "What's your name, please?" She said, "Well, St. Peter, my name is Earlene Pitts." He said, "Earlene, hold on now. I got the good book here, let me find you." And he goes to Earlene Pitts, and he was amazed. "Earlene, look at the crowns and the stars next to your name in the great book of life." He said, "This is wonderful." He said, "What an exemplary life you led while you were on earth." He said, "If you can spell the word love, you may enter into an eternity of peace and happiness and tranquility." She said, "Well, that's easy, Love." He said, "Enter in." Well, there wasn't anybody else in line. So he turns to Earlene and said, "Earlene, look, Moses and I got to run a little errand over here. How about you handling the good book for just a few minutes for me?" "Oh, I don't think I could do that." "No, Earlene, it's easy. Look, if their name's indelibly printed in the great book of life, and they can successfully spell the word love, you let them here into heaven." She said, "Okay." Well, over the next 10 minutes, 7 people showed up. Each one of them had their name printed in the book of life. Each one of them successfully spelled the word love. She let them in. Well, during this time, she couldn't help but notice how wonderfully the men in heaven treated the women. They were thoughtful, they were kind, they were respectful, they were gentle, they were loving. They were all the things that her own marriage back on earth lacked. Well, lo and behold, she turns around, and here comes her husband, Earl. "Earl, what in the world are you doing here?" He said, "Well, darling, I was down there to Rack and Q shooting billiards with the boys, and we were knocking down some double shots of bourbon, and I got a call that said you was in the hospital." So he said, "I jumped in my pickup, and I run a stop sign, and a semi hauling logs ran over me and killed me dead." And then he got a big grin on his face. He said, "But ain't it wonderful that you and I are going to get to spend eternity together?" She said, "Not unless you can spell Czechoslovakia." In a gathering this size, undoubtedly there are a lot of different denominations represented from a standpoint of religion and Christianity and so forth. A friend of mine the other day comes up to me and said, "Robert, did you know the Baptists outnumber the Methodists in the state of Georgia 2-1? I said, "Well, so what?" He said, "Well, what are we going to do about the Baptists and the kudzu problem?" I said, "Well, I don't know about the Baptists, but you sprinkle enough whiskey on that kudzu and the Baptists will eat it right down to the nub." I tell you, I really, in all honesty, I've been to a lot of different denominations in my life. And for example, I would have been a Presbyterian, but I couldn't spell it early on, so that was out. I call myself an Episcopal-Metho-Baptarian. Okay, but it's a little bit of everything there. I will tell you that my preacher's a very loving, a very caring individual. We were down in Columbus recently, and a beggar came up to him on the street. He said, "Excuse me, sir." He said, "I hadn't eaten for 3 days." He said, "Well, that's what I call willpower. Now, that's good. That's strong there." But sometimes we can be well-meaning. We can have, we can just have our best foot forward and trying to do something right, and no matter what we do, it turns out wrong. A fella comes into our Hamilton International Breakfast Club not long ago. Had 2 black eyes. And of course, everybody, how'd you get the black eye? Who'd you fight? How'd you get the black eye? He said, well, I was in church yesterday. And he said, we stood up to sing Amazing Grace. And he said, there was a rather large woman in front of me. And he said, I don't know exactly how to put this, but he said she had the crease of her dress was kind of tucked up in there, And he said, being the Christian guy I am, I just reached up there and gently gave it a tug. And when I did, she turned around and hung one on me right there, a left hook right there. Well, that explains that, but how did you get the other black eye? He said, well, when the service was over and we stood up to sing When the Roll is Called Up Yonder, I decided since I'd offended her before, I'd just reach up there and tuck it back in. You may have read about this story in your newspaper, no matter where you're from. It happened a few months ago in Macon, Georgia, and it was carried in a lot of other newspapers around the South. But a fellow was jogging through a residential neighborhood in Macon, and as he rounded a bend, he came up upon a pit bulldog about to attack a 5-year-old boy. And just as this bulldog leapt with these gaping jaws toward this child, this fellow reaches out and grabs this dog by his jaws, and he not only subdues him, but he kills this dog. And a fellow who had seen the entire incident comes running up to him. He said, Mister. He said, I got to tell you something. That's the most heroic act I've ever seen in my life. He said, and not only that, he said, I'm a reporter for the Macon Telegraph newspaper. And I want you to know that tomorrow's headline shall read, Local Hero Saves Child Kills Vicious Dog. And the fellow said, well, he said, I'm really not from Macon. He said, well, in that case, the headline will read, Georgian Saves Child from Bad Dog. He said, well, I'm really not from Georgia. He said, I'm from New Jersey. He said, well, in that case, the headline will read, Yankee Kills Family Pet. Laughter's been described as the greatest antidote in the world for stress, the panacea for the cluttered mind, the great elixir for the soul. Laughter is the great shock absorber for life. As human beings, you and I are the only creatures on earth that ever been designed with an ability to laugh. And I don't think there's any doubt that our Creator made us that way for a reason. You have honored me with your laughter here tonight. I'm so glad you're here. In closing, let me share one bit of sage advice with you, if I might. And that is this, given me by an elderly Oxford scholar. He said, before you criticize someone, walk a mile in his shoes. And then when you do criticize him, you'll be a mile away and you'll have his shoes. Thank you very much.